I remember that December like a photograph that had been left too long in the sun. It had lost some of its color. The edges were brown, and there was a hard crack running through it where joy used to be. It had been a year of little things. The kind that pile up until a mattress of small slights becomes a floor of broken tiles. My retirement account had taken a hit. My back ached. My wife had passed 3 years before, and the house felt too big, the silence too loud. But still, I had the rhythms of life. The newspaper, the coffee, the Saturday grocery run, the phone calls with my son Mark. Mark and I were never what you'd call close. We were adequate. We exchanged the right number of holiday gifts. We shared the right quantity of updates about jobs, houses, the weather. I had helped him buy a house 15 years ago. Co-signed, put my name on loan paperwork when he couldn't qualify a loan. That decision was the last one I made when I thought the world was simple. Father helps son. Son thrives. Everyone moves forward. It felt like an act of faith in him and in the future. Over the years, things shifted. Mark married Rachel. Then things shifted again. Kids came. Schedules hardened into something that left less space for Sunday lunches. I told myself the drift was normal. That was how families lived now. Orbiting each other, rarely colliding long enough to see clearly. So I was taken off guard by the text. It was December 10th. I just put a roast in the oven, the house smelling of rosemary and citrus, when my phone buzzed on the counter. Mark. Hey, Dad. Busy? Talk later. Merry Christmas. We'll see you around. Not sure when. Lots going on. Brief, clipped. Not rude. Not loving. I called him. His voice had a distracted edge, the way a man on a tightrope speaks when he doesn't want to admit how dizzy he is. Hey, Dad. How's it going? Look, we're swamped. The kids have school programs and Rachel's juggling deadlines. Maybe we'll swing by on Christmas Eve, maybe the 26th. Don't hold your breath, okay? The phrase stung in a way I wasn't prepared for. Don't hold your breath. It felt like an instruction to stop hoping. For reasons I couldn't fully explain, it felt like more than a scheduling problem. There was a coolness to his voice, as if something in him had hardened, and his regard for me had calcified into mere obligation. I tried to laugh it off. So, you're saying you're not expecting me for Christmas? He chuckled, a practice sound, and the distance it was so precise that I felt it hit the bones. Yeah, don't plan around us, Dad. We'll let you know. That evening I sat at my kitchen table with the roast cooling under a tin of foil, and the house suddenly felt smaller than it had before. I could do a dozen things. Stew and hurt, call him back and demand explanations, drink the wine and feel sorry for myself. But the old habit of doing something, anything instead of nothing, had always kept me afloat. Mark. I texted without thinking. If you're not planning on having me over for Christmas, maybe we should talk about the mortgage. I've been covering it. He answered too quickly. Dad, you don't need to do that anymore. We've got it. That was the fulcrum. That was where the story turned. Maybe it was the tone of his message. Maybe it was age and disappointment and a physical weariness that made me less patient than I had been. Or maybe it was a strange little inventory every man makes when he's alone at night, of all the debts owed, the kindnesses given, the moments spent waiting on someone who never came. Whatever the alchemy, I felt a cold determination settle into my chest where sadness had been. He could tell me he was too busy for me. He could tell me he wasn't expecting me for Christmas. But he could not, in my estimation, leave me when I'd been leaving for him all those years. I slept poorly with that roast turning to memories, and in the morning my mind was not calm. It had the shape of a plan. When revenge arrives, it is rarely dramatic in the beginning. It starts as a piece of paper, a telephone call, the discovery of a fact that suddenly looks like an accusation. In my case, the fact that it had been there for years that I had been helping Mark with mortgage payments became a cornered animal. I had been doing it quietly, like a ghostly benefactor, an extra monthly transfer, an offhand, I'll cover this month that turned into, I'll cover another month, and then into a rhythm. I had not asked for acknowledgement. I had not asked for thanks. It had felt good, paternal, necessary. But when a son tells you not to expect him for Christmas, the ledger shifts. All those unspoken transfers stack up into a testimony. I had been carrying him. For what? Gratitude? Perhaps. For loyalty? I had hoped. For the love that is supposed to bind father and son? It turned out to be a fragile bridge. I say all this not as justification, but as context. There's often a logic to acts born of hurt. The logic is not moral so much as personal. Mine was naked. The man who had refused to receive me for the holidays had been receiving my money for years. I considered blowing up at Mark. I considered the theater of anger, calling him and telling him exactly how inadequate he had been, demanding dinners and respect. But fury without consequence is pyrotechnics. Real change requires leverage. The ledger, the monthly payment, the mortgage was leverage. It tied us together in a way his words had just tried to untie. I had the option to use it. For a long time, I had refused to weaponize my love. That December, I decided I would. Let me be absolutely clear. What followed was not born of greed. It was born of an archaic belief, hard and foolish as stone, that reciprocity matters. Not tit for tat, but acknowledgement. If my son could tell me not to expect him at Christmas, there would be a cost. I called my bank. I called my financial advisor. I reviewed the stack of cancellations and transfers and old printed statements. I sat in my chair for long hours with a cup of decaffeinated coffee going cold on the table and made lists. First, a moral list, how hurt I felt, what he said, the years of my help, then the practical list, what I could do without breaking the law or my own sense of what was tolerable. I was, even as I contemplated retribution, careful to avoid the steps that would make me the villain in a way I could not repair. I was not a child tossing rocks through windows. I was a man who had rights. There was also a stubbornly practical side to me. I am not reckless. I did not go into this thinking of theatrical acts. My goal, which I repeated to myself like prayer, was to make Mark understand, in a way that could not be ignored, that taking my presence and my contributions for granted has a price, not to destroy him, but to wake him. And so, for days, I moved very slowly. I played the part of the distracted father at work. I let the roast get cold. I let the silence press in. I made plans that seemed innocuous to those who loved me. To my bank, I spoke calmly and asked about the mechanics of my own transfers. Nothing more. That allowed me breathing room. At the same time, there was a small, shameful thrill in the idea. People confessed to me sometimes about small revenges, switching a neighbor's mail, hiding a partner's keys. The guilty delight is human. Mine was similar but built on much older bones, the bones of a man who had been giving and would now refuse until recognition was paid. The more I thought about it, the more the image of a quiet, significant gesture performed close to Christmas glowed in my mind like a lantern. Planning is nothing without a moment of reckoning. I did not want to terrorize my son or to create a legal nightmare for myself. My line was this: demonstrate consequence without criminality if possible. If I had hoped to teach him something, I had to stay 2 steps inside the boundary of honor. Many of the decisions we make when we are angry are later regretted because they are made on a cliff edge. I did not want to leap. I wanted to step on the cliff and make the wind speak my name. The course I set was surgical. I had to be honest about 2 things: my capacity, what I could do without damaging myself irreparably, and the likely fallout. Mark will be upset. Rachel will be furious. There will be calls to old friends, and family conversations would be strained. There might be the kind of social shaming that now takes place in the small Danielson community. I was prepared for those things because I had been preparing my message. You do not dismiss your father. You do not assume his kindness is permanent. I got my affairs in order. I called the mortgage company as a client, not to manipulate, but to discuss options and understand points of contact. If anything, I wanted to keep myself legally clean. I had co-signed once upon a time, but the years have been merciful. Many loans have been paid down and the landscape complicated. I retained to counsel the lawyer I trusted, explaining my feelings without explaining my intentions. He asked questions about legal implications and advised caution. That was all I wanted. Not a lawyer to spur me into a legal action, but someone to make sure if I acted, I did so within the law or at least with full awareness of consequences. Now, it would be easy here to describe specifics, the calls made, the click-throughs, the timing. I will not. There's a line between telling a story and instructing wrongdoing. I want to be clear to myself and to you. This is fictions and narratives room. It is not a how-to. What I can say and will say is this. I prepare a move that would have the immediate effect of forcing Mark and his household to recognize that my support was not automatic. The move had teeth. It would push him to make a choice. Receive help and be grateful or face the consequences. The morning I set my plan into motion, I felt like a man walking into a winter storm with a determined stride. I put on my coat, not heavy but steady, and mailed the letter I had drafted with the help of my lawyer. The letter was precise and blunt. It informed Mark, not in an accusatory tone, but in a factual and irrevocable voice, that I would no longer be the primary source of the mortgage payment going forward. It laid out, in plain terms, what that meant, that the automatic transfer that had been my invisible help would stop at the end of the month, unless he reached out in good faith face-to-face to discuss a plan. I included a note that the family had to pay respect where respect was due. I sent it certified. Then I waited. This kind of action is small in the world scale, but seismic in a family. It is an action that converts the invisible into the visible, the taken for granted into the matter that must be confronted. It is the difference between doing someone a favor and making them aware that the favor is an act, not an entitlement. I did not, at that moment, consider myself cruel. I considered the long nights I had spent making mortgage payments possible. I considered the empty chairs at holiday tables and the coldness in my son's voice. I did not judge my motives as pure, whose motives are, but I judged them honest. And so the letter went, and the calendar kept turning. Mark called me the day the certified letter arrived. He did not call first with anger. He called with shock. I could hear Rachel shouting in the background, a chorus of disbelief and fury. He said things I would have expected. "Dad, how can you do this? You know we're underwater with the house. How could you threaten us like this right before Christmas?" He asked, pleading at times, and at times he accused, "You're trying to punish us." His voice alternated between hurt and the kind of rationalization sons use when they are cornered. I kept my voice steady. "I'm not trying to punish you, Mark. I want you to know what it means to take someone's help for granted. You told me not to expect you for Christmas. That's fine, but don't treat my presence like something disposable." The legal terrain opened like a map between us. Mark spoke of the mortgage company and the payments that would be missed. He brought up possibilities of being fined, of credit damage, all legitimate. I listened. I had expected that. But I also noticed that when people are forced into clarity of consequence, they either grow or break. A week passed. Mark sent curt texts, brief apologies, the sort of gestures that one makes when the thrust of a relationship is not understood. He came by once at night to pick up a box of decorations I had left for him. He stood on my threshold, hands in pockets, and said, "I'll call you next week, Dad." The next week came and went. Then the mortgage statement arrived in the mail at my address. A simple slip, an account summary with a big, unavoidable number. Unpaid. The bank had reached out, as they always do when a payment fails. They had made 2 attempts to withdraw the funds and had been met with stops because I had stopped the transfers. I had taken the step that converted my letter into a reality. The fallout was immediate. There was a call from the mortgage company to my home. A polite woman asking me if I wanted to reinstate the transfer and whether everything was all right. I answered truthfully. I had stopped it. The woman, trained in procurement and customer service, hesitated. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, "we may have to consider alternative measures if payments aren't resolved." Those were the words that start the cascades. Notices the Mark's address, escalating letters, reminders. The bank is not a villain. It is a merciless bureaucracy when money is not present, and it is designed to produce consequences that are mechanical and indifferent. I watched the mechanical consequences unfold in my own son's life. Late fees, the polite but pressing statements, the mounting anxiety. What prudence demands here is the acknowledgement that the pulse of a human heart doesn't always beat at the same tempo as a ledger. The bank didn't care about Mark's Christmas or Rachel's deadlines. It cared about payments and numbers. I had made a calculated decision to let those numbers speak my message. The first time Mark stood in my living room and cried, it broke me in ways I hadn't predicted. He was not theatrical. He was stripped bare. "I didn't know what to do, Dad," he said. "Rachel and I argued. We didn't tell you because we didn't want to worry you. We figured we'd handle it. I thought you'd always be there." His words were small, the way small things when they have been neglected for a long time. It would be easy here to claim that the sight of my son in tears made me repent and that I immediately reversed course. That would sterilize the truth. The truth is that I sat with my son's tears and felt a complex blend of satisfaction and sorrow. Human beings are many things at once. We can ache and feel vindicated by equal measure. I did what a father might do. I held him and we talked. But I held a space that was not unconditional. "You owe me an accounting," I said, "not in bank terms, but in life terms. Why did you tell me not to expect you? Who were you becoming? Why did you hide things from me?" He told me half-truths at first, then the whole story tumbling out like a landslide. The pressures at work, a foolish investment that had gone sour, borrowed help from acquaintances who promised quick relief and left deeper debt in their wake. He was not a villain. He was foolish, ashamed, and cornered. But he had also been cavalier with a man who had tried to help him. There was an ugly thing I had to concede. The bank had become a teacher in the house. There's a certain civic lesson money imparts. It can clarify responsibilities. To my surprise, Mark began to change. Not suddenly, not with the theatrical flip of a villain in a movie. He paid part-time, cut spending, took a few extra shifts, and met with a financial counselor recommended by my lawyer. There was a humility in that month that was hard to watch and impossible to ignore. At the same time, I watched his friends and family took sides. Some called me cruel. Others called me necessary. Rachel did not forgive me, and she made sure to let me know it in ways that found their way back to me via mutual acquaintances. But some of Mark's friends, men who had watched him grow and who had long resented the way he sloughed obligations off on others, sent me short, grateful messages. "Good for you." He needed the wake up. Those messages warmed me and chilled me in equal measure. And then the bank did what banks do. It applied pressure. The mortgage company, after a period of warnings, began to process steps of default when payments were not brought current. I watched those letters come like a slow storm. I had not wanted foreclosure. That would have been cruelty, not consequence. My plan had been to wake my son to his responsibilities, not to ruin his life. The difference between intention and effect is the abyss every man fears standing near. When the bank finally told us there was a window, that if Mark could commit to a repayment plan, or if I could reinstate transfers and then formalize my withdrawal, I asked my son to sit with me and reckon. Something shifted in his face when he realized the ship might still be righted by his own hands. That ultimately was my aim, to make him chart a course instead of drifting on autopilot. His embarrassment was honest. His work was real. He began to move. Revenge, when enacted, tastes different than you imagine. There is a sweetness to seeing someone you love accept their responsibilities. But sweetness is mixed with guilt and the residue of a wound. When a son learned a lesson because of father's withdrawal, both parties carry scars. I had not expected it would feel like both triumph and remorse in equal measure. Mark and Rachel came by the house one evening in January. The children were bundled and asleep. Mark sat at my kitchen table, worn, eyes red. He handed me a spreadsheet he had made, his work plan, months of reduced expenses, and a campaign to clear debt. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said simply. The words were not theatrical. They were the humble kind, the kind men say who have been broken and then begin to build. I looked at him and felt a complicated satisfaction. The man had become smaller in arrogance and larger in accountability. He had learned a lesson through consequence. That was perversely my victory. It resonated with the primitive parts of me. For once, he couldn't pretend kindness would be automatic. He had to earn it again. He appeared ready. Whether he would succeed, time would tell. But satisfaction was not a clean thing. There were relatives who never fully forgave me, who whispered about cruelty and the old man's temper. Mark's marriage had been strained in the months after. The stress slid like a chisel across their lives, revealing fractures. In the mouths of some, I had become a parable of bitter discipline. In others, a difficult but necessary father. Life is stubbornly polyphonic like that. During those months, I had plenty of time to reflect. I went for long walks and sat in the church at odd hours, not to pray so much as to think. I thought about the lines I had crossed and the lines I had not. I thought about a roast left in the oven, cooling, while the world rearranged itself because a son told his father not to expect him. I thought about how small acts accumulate into an edifice of entitlement. Would I do it again? I asked myself that repeatedly in the dark. The answer was not simple. There were moments when I would say yes with a hard certainty. If Mark ever told me he wasn't expecting me for Christmas again, if he ever again treated my presents as disposable while expecting my cash, I would consider a similar, measured wake-up. There were other moments. In the quiet when he held my hand and said thank you, when it felt like a mercy that we found the course. I do not recommend this path for others. I am old enough to know that one can easily become the tyrant one resents in others. I tiptoed along a dangerous edge. There are other ways to teach, to insist, to coax accountability. The moral calculus is private and jagged, but the story sits in my chest. A man who used a ledger to make himself seen. The one thing I will say plainly is that with craft and calculation, with a lawyer's advice and an eye on legality, you can move the invisible levers that steady family dynamics. Many will call that manipulation. Some will call it wisdom dressed in stone. I call it a lesson learned the hard way. For both of us. When that next Christmas rolled through, Mark and his family came early. There were hugs that felt cautious and sincere. He set the table. He brought a small, thoughtful gift for me, a book I'd wanted for years. When he handed it to me, his hand was steady. "Dad," he said, "I'm glad you told me the truth. I'm sorry I made you do it this way." That sorry was partial. It didn't erase the months of strain and fear, but opened something like a new path. Maybe that is the point. The world is heavy with consequences, and sometimes they must be administered for the soul to bud again. Or maybe I am fooling myself, telling a comfortable story about the one time I chose consequence over quiet surrender. If you ask me whether the price was worth it, I will say this. Mark stopped assuming my love was a bank. He began to participate in it. We have dinner more often now, not because any ledger demands it, but because conversations have been had and behaviors altered. The pain did not vanish. The roast still left a scent at the edge of memory, but there was also a strange, dark satisfaction in the knowledge that my choice had carved out a space for honesty. And for reasons I did not fully recognize until later, that mattered more than I expected. The ledger had been closed in one sense, and opened in another. He had to meet me again, not as a ghost donor, but as a son. He had to, at last, expect me for Christmas, and mean it. The house is quieter now in a different way. There has been healing, and there has been estrangement too. The world loves both. Mark and I talk about things we never used to discuss. The small, lonely hours, the pressure work, the modest hopes and humiliations. He is not perfect. He will never be. I am not innocent. I sometimes look at the mortgage documents, folded into a neat envelope on my shelf. It is a small thing, paper and ink, but once it was the anchor of a decision. I have not reinstated any automatic transfer without Mark's explicit plan, and he has kept to it. The bank has not foreclosed. Rachel and I have not healed every wound, but we have lightened the burden. Revenge is a dangerous diet. It fills your mouth in the moment and leaves you with thirst. I took it because I believed it was the means to something more candid and enduring, a son who recognizes a father's expenditure of life. The cost was high. The benefit is complicated. If there's a lesson in all this, perhaps it is this. Love that is unrecognized becomes either a chain that binds or the fuel for fire. Sometimes you extinguish the flames and rebuild. Sometimes you smother yourself in smoke. I was lucky enough, if luck has any part in this story, to see my son make an effort to change. For that, and for the awkward small joys of rebuilt dinners, I am grateful. And yes, when he apologized that first Christmas after my letter, I accepted, not because nothing had happened, but because something new had been built in the ruin, a fragile, honest contract between us made of accountability, and the hard knowledge that love is not always unconditional unless we choose to make it so. If you are listening and you feel the same prickle of injustice I felt, if you find yourself wondering whether to act or to swallow the hurt, I can only tell you this. Measure well, get counsel, and know the difference between teaching and torment. In our story, pain gave way to accountability. It did not give way to glory, only to a quieter, truer kind of peace. And sometimes that is the only revenge that truly matters.